Conservative commentator Darren Grimes has been questioned by police on suspicion of stirring up racial hatred over comments made by historian David Starkey in a controversial interview.
Yes, it should be pointed out these are not comments made by Darren Grimes. They're comments for which Mr Starkey has apologised, and they were made during a discussion on slavery. It was published on Darren Grimes's YouTube channel, sparking widespread condemnation. Before we play the clip, we should warn you, you will find the content
Well, you
offensive.
should find it offensive, yeah. Here he is.
Slavery was not genocide. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many damn blacks in Africa or in Britain, would there? You know, an awful lot of them survived.
I mean, a shocking, disgraceful, clearly very racist thing to be saying. Darren Grimes joins us now. He argues that the police action against him will have a chilling effect on free speech. We're also joined by Professor Kehinde Andrews, who argues that police are finally enforcing the laws, and we'll come to that in a moment. But Darren Grimes, look, you know, we've actually had a chat about this in an unlikely part of the world. We bumped into each other in France, but it was an interesting conversation because what I was struck by was you were very candid about the fact that you hadn't challenged David Starkey enough in the moment, and that you should have done, and you were learning your trade as an interviewer. So talk about that for a moment. We'll come to the police action. Yeah. But in terms of what Starkey said, it was so starkly racist. Why didn't you challenge him more in the moment?
Listen, this is one of our country's most eminent historians, right? Someone that I'd grown up with, and I learnt more about the Tudors and the Reformation from, I think, David Starkey's documentaries than I did at my state comprehensive. I think, to be honest, Piers, I hold my hands up. I wasn't invested in that interview as much as I should have been. I was sort of taken in by the fact I was interviewing someone who I've watched on television most of my life. And I definitely should have been more aware of what was being said and challenged it. And this is exactly what I said to you, as you know. And I really wish I had have done. And I apologised for the offence that interview caused. And of course, Dr Starkey has lost every honour that he ever had, and he has profusely apologised for it as well. But as far as stirring up racial hatred is concerned, if you ask me, Piers and Susanna, the only person that Dr Starkey stirred up hatred against was himself. OK,
well, hang on a moment, because the clip that we just showed, slavery wasn't genocide, otherwise there wouldn't be... And then this just simply incredibly offensive phrase about the consequences. Your job as an interviewer, of course, and we didn't show your response to the clip, but what was your response? Because clearly you should then step in and say, that's an incredibly offensive thing to say, it has no basis, it has, you know, horrible connotations. Why didn't you then respond in that way?
Well, I didn't respond to it, but look, the public certainly responded to it. Everyone online responded to it. And I think in any democracy which enshrines freedom of the press and free speech, it should absolutely be right that people criticise the ideas that they disagree with. You know, Dr Starkey's view on what does and doesn't constitute genocide, people have an absolute right in any free society such as ours, in any democracy such as ours, to be able to say, well, hang on a minute, you're not right here. I disagree with you for X, Y, and Z.
But Darren, you didn't say that in that moment, did you?
I didn't do that. No, I'm not. And I just said, I hold my hands up. I should have done that. I wasn't invested enough in that interview.
But the question, Darren, then becomes, should you be subject to police investigation? Tell us exactly what has happened with that regard in relation to you.
So the police contacted us last week and asked if I'd come to be interviewed at a police station under caution and threatened with arrest if I refuse. Now, that was a Public Order Act offence. They say that, and the Public Order Act, for your viewers, that criminalises the stirring up of racial hatred, and it carries with it a 7-year maximum sentence. Now, that's what I'm accused of. And it's intended, that act, an act passed by Margaret Thatcher in 1986, to preserve public order, not to regulate speech and debate. So, Susanna and Piers, you are more than welcome to criticise me as an interviewer, but this is an unprecedented use of the legislation, and I reckon should concern anyone who believes in freedom of the press and speech. And actually, GMB have many controversial speakers.
Well, we're going to come to that. We're actually going to talk to one now.
Controversial speaker.
Let's go to the Kehinde Andrew. So, Kehinde, by chance, my book is out this week.
Oh, my goodness.
And the reason I mention that is there's a lot of stuff in this book that flies right to this whole debate about freedom of speech and how far it's been taken, the damaging intrusion into people's right to free speech and to have an opinion. Here's my problem with this. What David Starkey said was disgusting. And I think it's quite right that he's been effectively no platform. You know, this cancel culture, which is completely out of control, should not protect people who make overtly racist remarks like that. And the moment he said what he said, I was like, this guy, that's disgusting. So we can all agree on that. But what I don't agree with is the police going after an interviewer for something that one of his guests said, which is inflammatory, because what's that got to do with the interviewer? Yes, he should have challenged, he's admitted that, but he didn't agree with the comments. He didn't say, I completely agree with you. Why do you believe it's right the police get involved?
Well, I think there's two issues here. One of them is, you know, the fact that we think that David Starkey should even be on TV after 10 years ago said the whites have become black and that's why the riots happened. So it's not like he's a first-time offender.
And I agree with you, and I said that at the time, by the way.
The interview should have some history on that. Secondly, this isn't about free speech. This is about the fact that Darren Grimes published hate speech. He didn't have to, and nodding along with the equivalent of Holocaust denial is basically agreeing it. That's what's being charged here.
So every time I do an interview, Kehinde, or every time Susanna and I do an interview with a controversial person, we've had Tommy Robinson on this show, we've had very homophobic Northern Irish politicians, we've had a lot of people, right? Kehinde, are you saying that every time we have someone like that on who says something inflammatory, we should be investigated by the police?
It's not about inflammatory, and I'm absolutely certain that you have a legal department that will say, actually, you know what, can we do this and can we not do that? That's why it's more important in this age where you have YouTube, you have Twitter, you have some people who just put things out without looking at responsibility. Would you have a Holocaust denier on Good Morning Britain?
No, but we have had...
Exactly.
No, but Kehinde, hang on. We have had somebody who said that the British Empire was worse than the Nazis. Let's play the clip.
That's a factual statement. Yeah.
60% of British people believe the empire was a force for good. I mean, this is like saying the Nazis built motorways, so we should celebrate them. This is literally an irrational...
You're comparing the British Empire to Nazi Germany.
You're right, there is no comparison. The British Empire did far more harm to the world for a far more...
You're saying the British Empire was worse.
But what about...
You also said that whiteness was a psychosis. Let's take a look.
This whiteness is a psychosis. You can't have an actual reasonable discussion because this is the kind of thing.
Well, but the trouble is, you say we can't have a reasonable discussion.
But you say call whiteness a psychosis.
Whiteness is a psychosis.
Do you think...
You're basically calling all white people nuts.
No, that is not. Nope, that's not what I said.
Well, whiteness is a psychosis. So, Kehinde, I put it to you that you said. Now, you might well defend it again. I'm sure you would. You said it the first time. Why wouldn't you? But you said stuff that I can tell you caused absolute outrage amongst many of our viewers, many of whom thought that you were stirring up racial hatred towards white people by talking about whiteness being a psychosis. So I put it to you. If we then, as we have done, I believe, that's available on our YouTube channel. We're doing exactly the same with your interview that Darren Grimes did with David Starkey. By your yardstick, shouldn't Susanna and I now be investigated and interviewed under caution by the police for putting onto YouTube inflammatory comments by you? And what's the difference, if not?
The fact that you think those two things are equivalent just proves the point that whiteness is a psychosis. These are not the same.
Well, you just repeated it again. So you're calling all white people psychotic.
Again, that's not what I said. I said
it is what you're saying.
The way that we understand the world is completely irrational. And this is a perfect example. You have hate speech published into the public platform. The police rightly go and investigate it. And there's all this furore. I mean, it's this idea of fragility as well. He hasn't been arrested. He hasn't been charged. He's not going to prison for 7 years. And the criminal justice system is one of the most racist parts of our society. So the idea that the police and the courts...
But why should you be free? Why should you, Kehinde, why should you be free to say whiteness is a psychosis which is inflammatory to all white people. Well, OK, you might think it's valid. I would say as a white person, I find that offensive. I also found it offensive, frankly, that you would make any comparison between the British Empire and Nazi Germany, given the scale of atrocities of Nazi Germany.
I can't be responsible for your ignorance, Piers.
I'm not ignorant, Kahinde, and you may use that as your... You may use that... OK, you may use my apparent ignorance as a justification for what you said, but here's my point. We have put what you said on our ITV Hub, on our YouTube platform. We've done exactly the same. Yeah, but you don't think it's offensive. So what you're really saying is, that is, again, central plank of my book. On the left, the kind of illiberal, liberal, woke element of the left, it's two standards. There's a standard for people like Darren Grimes, who is on the right, who does something wrong. But when it comes to your own inflammatory comments, I would argue, respectfully, I would argue that you want the right to be as inflammatory as you like about white people and about Churchill and about everything else, but you don't want to be held to the same criminality of people on the right.
Piers, if I was advocating hatred for white people, there's so many damn white people all there, I would rightly be charged. I would also point out,
whiteness is a psychosis.
More than once.
You said whiteness is a psychosis. What could be more inflammatory?
And I follow that
if
up
I
by
said
saying
blackness is a psychosis, you would go completely nuts.
No, I wouldn't actually. I'd look at this. What are you trying to say? What am I saying? Why it's psychosis? We cannot have a proper conversation. We cannot understand our history correctly. That's what I'm saying. Nothing about individual white people, nothing about hatred for white people. And if I was, I would rightly be charged. And actually, under the Racial Relations Act, some of the first people who were charged were Black Power activists like Roy Saw and Obi Egbuna, and still are. The idea that the law is punishing...
But it's the fact that, Kahinde, it's the fact that, if I may jump in, it's the fact that you don't think a phrase like whiteness is a psychosis is remotely inflammatory to white people. That's the problem. You want a double standard applied to your own inflammatory racial remarks, and you don't want Darren Grimes put through the same process of it's all okay because I believe it.
Now, we have to distinguish between inflammatory, and I rightly say inflammatory things. Inflammatory is fine, right? When actually hate speech is a different thing.
I think whiteness is psychosis is hate speech against white people. It is. No, it isn't. It is.
OK. Just to point out that Darren Grimes, your defence, of course, is that you didn't endorse or believe in what David Starkey was saying. You claim that you just did not step in because the interview sort of was washing over you. If you'd had the opportunity now, what would you say to him?
Well, listen, I would ask him what exactly he means by that comment, because of course it was an offensive thing to say. And in any free society, you have a right to challenge that view. And people did. And David Starkey has unreservedly apologised since. And not only just been cancelled, he's been airbrushed from history. But listen, I think it's important to actually take a step back and look at the fact that everyone from a communist like Ash Sarkar to a Liberal Democrat like Tim Farron are taking issue with the police decision to investigate me for the offence of stirring up racial hatred, which again falls under the Public Order Act. This is a really unprecedented use of that act, and I reckon they're not alone in that view. If we look at the former Director of Public Prosecutions, Lord MacDonald, he told The Times yesterday that he believed the actions of the police here are sinister and foolish and deeply threatening of free speech.
Darren, now, when you hear Kahinde trying to draw a line between the stuff that he said, which I would argue is equally racially inflammatory, like whiteness is a psychosis. If I said blackness is a psychosis, people like Kahinde would go nuts, and rightly. So when I hear that there's one rule for that kind of comment, but a totally different rule for you allowing a guest to make another inflammatory comment, what's your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction is that in a free and democratic society, it's absolutely paramount that journalists and broadcasters, no matter if it's one as big and popular as Good Morning Britain or as small and YouTube-based as Reasoned UK, we must be permitted to interview a wide range of people, including those likely to make controversial remarks, as Professor Andrews continues to do. Comparing the British Empire to the Holocaust is absolutely extraordinary, and threatening them with arrest will have a real real chilling effect on free speech. I vehemently disagree with everything that Professor Andrews says, but it would not dawn upon me for 1 second to report him to the police or believe that he should get 7 years in prison. That's absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, well, it's not just extraordinary, it's ridiculous. Thank you both very much. I hope the police see sense and they drop this ridiculous behaviour, because otherwise every journalist... Well, Kahinda, you might not like it, but it literally means if Tommy Robinson comes on this programme, or we had... I remember a very bigoted Northern Ireland politician, railing against same-sex couples on Strictly Come Dancing. When he preaches his homophobia... Hang on, Gandhi. Hang on. You'll get a chance to respond. When somebody comes on here and preaches rampant homophobia, as we had with the Northern Ireland politician, and we take him on and we challenge him, should we then be subject to a police investigation for what he said?
I think the point is there is a line. Like I said, you would not have David Irving, Holocaust denier on GMB for good reason, because there are some things which are hate speech and are not appropriate for public
What about
discourse.
a guy who says the same-sex... What about a guy who says same-sex couples should not be seen on Strictly Come Dancing because he's basically homophobic? Is that preaching hate speech?
There is also a difference when you're interviewing somebody and challenging them and nodding along. As soon as you nod along and publish it, you have therefore endorsed it. And you didn't have to publish it, and you could have put qualifications on it. You made a decision to publish nodding along to the denier of the African Holocaust.